Hello everyone, how are we doing? It's only been a few hours, I know, but we're back once again for the post-race reaction after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Got your guys' opinions over on the community tab, and I am waiting and watching to see if there's any other little bits of news coming out, but I think we're there. I think everybody has come out with their news, and we can get into everything that happened in Azerbaijan. As I said, I got your guys' opinions over on the community tab. 55 of you commented after the race. If you do want to get involved in these post-race reactions, that's the best place to go, because I effectively build the show around what you guys say over there. IDK, the Perez Sainz Collision. Oh, it was blooming tasty, wasn't it? Little collision right at the end of the Grand Prix on the penultimate lap. Kind of took a little bit of the shine away from it, but I'm still thinking, and I still personally feel like this Azerbaijan Grand Prix was one of the better Azerbaijan Grand Prix that we have had over the 8 seasons that it's been on the calendar. Lando started overtaking folks way before the race even started. That's very true. Got a couple of overtakes done just during post-qualifying procedures. P4, pretty decent overall for Lando. We'll delve into how he managed to do it. Unfortunate for Sergio Perez. It was his big chance, wasn't it? Sergio Perez, it was his big chance. He slipped away from it at the end, though. Oscar is a monster. I completely and utterly agree with SMKNDFDRNG. Great defending from King Charles indeed. Jack, one of the best races of the year. There's been some good... The problem is 2024 has been a good year for races, but I think you're quite up there. Wanted Charles to win, but glad it was Piastri. I feel like those two, you know, the fact that Charles got the win in Monza and Piastri obviously had to settle for P2, where Piastri was the driver leading the race in the opening stint. And then it kind of went the other way around this weekend, didn't it? They swapped positions. Charles Leclerc finished in second place behind Piastri, even though Charles Leclerc was the dominant driver through that first stint. So kind of worked its way. Piastri got to win this weekend. Charles Leclerc got to win the weekend before. And they've kind of balanced each other out over the course of those 2 weekends. Obviously, both of those drivers, looking at the last few races, absolutely stunning. Like, it does make you feel like if the Formula One season started from like Miami onwards, like if we could delete the first 4 or 5 races, this would be one of the tightest championship battles we have seen in such a long time. But unfortunately, Max Verstappen did have a little bit of a head start on everybody else. INV says Franco Colapinto and 2 stars. Absolutely just brilliant from Williams in general this weekend. But we'll delve into Franco Colapinto. We'll delve into Alex Albon. They were both absolutely disgustingly quick in that Williams car. Celebrating our shared love of Formula One, says Magnus. Going to start a back and forth analysis and bad takes. Spain and Mexico pretty much going to war. And it was that, to be fair. I have not seen sort of such a sort of 50-50 in terms of people blaming both drivers. Like, you go on any kind of social media after the race. I was kind of checking Twitter, making sure I hadn't missed any big news or bits and pieces like that. Like, half of the Formula One fan base thinks it was Carlos Sainz's fault. Half of the Formula One fan base thinks it's Sergio Perez's fault. I think depending on what country and which area of the world they come from. But genuinely, it was like 50-50, and both drivers were not happy about it going either way. But we'll talk about what actually happened and the repercussions from it. Although really didn't matter what happened post-race, because both Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz missed out on the opportunity to gain positions, possibly gain a podium each. Like, they could have even ended up finishing second and third, because Charles Leclerc looked like he was there for the taking a little bit towards the end of the Grand Prix. Claire Kicks, Williams probably regret keeping Sargent for so long. Harsh. But sort of true. I think it was one of those ones. I can completely understand what you mean. I think we'll delve into it a little bit more when we talk about Williams in a bit more detail, but it does just feel like Colapinto is a bit of a breath of fresh air Whereas Logan Sargent, there was a lot of history there. There was a lot of negativity. I think his confidence was shot to pieces, especially after what happened in Australia, where they gave his car to Alex Albon. It did feel like, yeah, it was a tough, tough season for Logan Sargent. And the fact that he got cut short, I think in the long run, he'll understand it. Right now, looking at the Williams car and how it's developed over the last few races, obviously their big upgrade coming in Great Britain, and then since that they've been able to fiddle a few pieces around, and then since the summer break, Alex Albon in particular has come out and absolutely flown, like double points finishes in Monza, in Azerbaijan, did pretty well in the Netherlands as well, and probably should have got more out of that race. Williams are looking on fire at this moment in time. Oscar was driving like a goat. Norris had a good recovery. Sergio Perez, arguably his strongest performance of the entire season. I think it was. I think it was, but he still comes away empty-handed. And that's the thing at the end of the day, isn't it? We're going to look at the championships. We're going to look at the fact the Constructors' Championship has fallen away from Red Bull. And Sergio Perez has got to kind of take a good chunk of the blame for that along the way. And yeah, it's been tough for him. Antonio David in the chat, what a race indeed. Oscar and Charles fighting was amazing to watch. And the way Oscar held it, absolutely wow indeed. But my goodness me, didn't want to wake up at 6 a.m. so watch the last 15 minutes. You caught an absolutely banger last 15 minutes if that was the case. And Sally also said it was her favourite race of the year so far. I'm definitely feeling Carlos Sainz just lost Ferrari. The Constructors turning in on Perez like that was crazy. Do you think he turned in on Sergio Perez? I don't know how I've got 50-50 opinions about it, but that was how you guys dealt with and felt after the race. As ever, if you want to get your questions, bits and pieces in, I build the chat and I build the show around what you guys say over on that community tab, and that allows me to fold in everything that you guys want discussed. But it was just a really, really fun race overall. And I got loads and loads of notes, loads and loads of things to go through. And this is going to be a banker of a live stream, I've got a feeling, because there's going to be a lot of to and fro with me and you guys in the comments and the discussion in the live chat. But let's go through the race results. Let's talk first and foremost, Oscar Piastri winning the Grand Prix, 25 points in his pocket. And the driver who has been incredible over the last 6-7 Grand Prix, you have to say at this point. I think he would be winning the championship if the championship started 7 races ago. Like, it's him and Leclerc, isn't it? Right up there. Charles Leclerc finishing in 2nd place just behind Oscar Piastri. George Russell inheriting a 3rd place finish. And again, I don't know what Mercedes will really take away from this weekend. It feels like they should be positive, right? It feels like they should be happy about picking up a podium. But George Russell even said himself afterwards, like, he doesn't really see it as a podium. He sees it as a 5th place finish. He still isn't happy with how the weekend went. He still isn't happy with the car. Was very negative about the Pirelli tyres as well, was George Russell. So he's not the happiest of bunnies. Lando Norris finished in 4th place, 13 points for Lando Norris. It feels like, given where he was at the beginning of the race, a very, very good return. Given what was talked about at the beginning of the weekend, not where Lando Norris would have wanted to be. A 4th place finish, 3 points gained on Max Verstappen in 5th place. And I've heard a few people say, well, obviously, Lando Norris gained a couple of positions, and it makes that race look a little bit better for Lando Norris than it actually was. But at the end of the day, he still only gains 3 points on Verstappen. That's the main thing. Is Lando Norris going to be that bothered about finishing 6th versus finishing 4th? In the grand scheme of things, absolutely not. You ask him about this race at the end of his career, he's not going to talk about the 6th place finish or 4th place finish. He's going to talk about what happened in qualifying and the fact that he felt so disappointed with himself after the qualifying. Then on the flip side of that, if they'd have finished 6th and 7th with Max Verstappen just behind, it would have still been 3 points gained. So it doesn't matter that Lando Norris has gained those couple of positions. It doesn't matter that Max Verstappen has gained those couple of positions going into 5th place. Where it really matters is for these guys In the top 10, Fernando Alonso finishing best of the rest in 6th place. 8 points on the board for Fernando, and just consolidating himself as the best of the rest driver this season, isn't he? Absolutely stunning drive once more from Fernando Alonso. And when he does click with the Aston Martin, okay, it's not the Aston Martin of old that was, or a season ago, that was sort of picking up him podiums fairly consistently. And the Aston Martin isn't anywhere near the top 4 teams at the moment. But at least they can be dominant and they can still be out the Williamses, the Hasses, even on a weekend where it doesn't look like it's going to really fall in their favour. Alex Albon, though, Colapinto, though, 7th, 8th place, 6 points on the board for Albon, 4 points on the board for Colapinto. Talking about Logan Sargent, obviously couldn't get any points over the course of the Grand Prix that he took part in. 15 Grand Prix for Logan Sargent, 0 points. 2 Grand Prix for Franco Colapinto, 4 points on the board. The Argentinian has arrived in Formula One fully, and he was stunning. And just really, really happy for Franco Colapinto and the team. Lewis Hamilton, sorry, I missed him out. I was talking about the big boys. I was talking about, Lando Norris, Max Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton down in 9th place. Disappointing, frustrating, lots of things to talk about from Lewis Hamilton's perspective. He's probably got one eye on Ferrari, hasn't he, at this point? He's looking across at Charles Leclerc in 2nd place and he's going, feel like I could have probably won that race if I was in that Ferrari. Ollie Bearman will also be looking at Ferrari, but for the future, as he picks up another point in Formula One for Ollie Bearman, a 10th place finish for the Briton. And 4 British drivers in the top 10. 4 out of 10 drivers in that top 10. British drivers on the board. Really is some British bias in Formula One, isn't there? Then outside of that, Nico Hülkenberg, 11th place. Nico Hülkenberg always finishes 11th. That must be what, the 5th or 6th or maybe even 7th time that Nico Hülkenberg has finished in 11th place. He finishes there constantly. And he'll be frustrated. He lost out on a couple of positions right at the end of the Grand Prix. And whether it was his fault, whether it was the steward's fault, we'll kind of delve into. Nico Hülkenberg a little bit annoyed after the race, it has to be said, considering it was a very good race from Nico Hülkenberg. Pierre Gasly kind of saved Alpine's bacon, finishing in 12th place. Daniel Ricciardo, the highest scoring RB, only 13th, Daniel Ricciardo. Some little news about RB to get into a little bit later on as well. Zhou Guanyu, 14th place in the Stakes Sauber, considering, where that Stakes Sauber was, the fact that he finished in front of Ocon, finished in front of Bottas fairly handedly as well. Not too bad from Zhou, but still the Stakes Sauber not great. As I mentioned, Esteban Ocon finishing in 15th place, Valtteri Bottas 16th place. Those 2 drivers finished a lap down on the leaders. And Sergio Perez, 17th spot, a DNF for the Mexican driver. He hit into Carlos Sainz, a DNF for the Spaniard as well. Lance Stroll also retired from the Grand Prix after damage and a puncture at the beginning of the race with contact after hitting Yuki Tsunoda, who came in 20th spot and also DNF'd from the Grand Prix. The result will continue to roll along the bottom of the screen if you did miss any of it. Let's see what you guys are saying. Bro Championship going. What are you talking about? The championship as in the constructors or the drivers? In terms of the drivers' standings, I haven't updated it. Give me one moment. In terms of the drivers' standings, of course, Max Verstappen still stands at the top of the drivers' standings by a considerable margin. Lando Norris moving forwards by 3 points at least, getting closer to Max Verstappen in the driver's standings. But it's that whole average 8 points, isn't it? Average 8 points. He's got to average 8 points every single time around. And is he going to be able to average that 8 points? It's getting tougher and tougher. Only a 3-point margin this time around. It was exactly 8 points in Monza. It was exactly 8 points in the Netherlands, which means now it's probably just over 8 points, isn't it? Because it was 7.75, so now it must be 8 and a bit. I'm talking like 8.5 points that Lando Norris has got to average. So really, it's jumped up to 9, hasn't it? He's got to average 9 points gained on Max Verstappen every single time around. And it's not impossible. If Lando Norris wins every race and Max Verstappen finishes 3rd, in every Grand Prix, then that's perfect. He would gain 10 points every time, chuck in a fastest lap there or anything, or maybe even a sprint race victory, and he would be right there. But it just doesn't play out like that, does it? Lando Norris hasn't been able to win consistently. After the Netherlands victory, it was like, okay, Lando Norris now. And I even remember, I think it was Andrea Stella. It might have been Andrea Stella, might have been Zach Brown. No, I think it was Andrea Stella. Stead afterwards, he was like, why can't we win, every race towards now, from now until the end of the season? And then they went to Monza and were swiftly sort of realized that it's really hard to do. And then even Oscar Piastri winning here in Azerbaijan, you could argue it's the wrong McLaren. Sorry, Oscar Piastri fans, but in the grand scheme of things and what Lando Norris and the team and everyone was going for, it's the wrong McLaren that they wanted on the top step of the podium. And Charles Leclerc then kind of creeping up on Lando Norris too. The gap between Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc closing ever more. Closed in Monza by 10 points, closing again this weekend. I suppose that's the main benefit for Lando Norris in jumping up to 4th rather than staying 6th, is he didn't lose out as much to Charles Leclerc as he would have done, and remains that step ahead of the Ferrari. But I wouldn't put Charles Leclerc outside of the realms of possibility of catching up to Lando Norris in all of this in the driver's standings. I don't think that battle is done and dusted by any means. I know that we're talking about Lando Norris versus Max Verstappen for the championship. I think Charles Leclerc is a little bit too off in terms of talking about him catching Verstappen, but talking about Leclerc catching Norris certainly could happen, especially next weekend in Singapore, which is a race where Ferrari should thrive, to be honest with you. Ferrari are good at the Singapores, the Azerbaijans, the Monacos of this world. So Ferrari, next weekend, Charles Leclerc is probably going to have one eye on Lando Norris and the second place spot in the driver's standings. Oscar Piastri then also kind of jumping up into 4th spot, 222 points. Carlos Sainz now cut adrift. You feel like that gap is a bit too much for Carlos Sainz at this point in the season, and Oscar Piastri's kind of guaranteed himself a spot in the top 4, which, considering where they were right at the beginning of the season, Carlos Sainz started the season electric, and Oscar Piastri was having a few races here and there that were slightly iffy. He had some good, like 4th place finish in Saudi Arabia, really, really solid. But then there were a few races that were a bit shaky from Oscar right at the beginning of the season. Now, though, just looks a completely different dynamic, doesn't it? Oscar Piastri, all the momentum behind him, all the confidence behind him, a McLaren car that he's super happy with. And Carlos Sainz today, very unlucky, but is sort of stuck there in 5th place, it does feel like, in the championship. Lewis Hamilton in 6th place still. George Russell finally jumps in front of Sergio Perez. I mean, he is equal to him on points, 143 apiece, but Sergio Perez dropping behind George Russell, and it's felt like that's coming for a very, very long time, even with Sergio Perez putting in the best performance of the season from him, I think, by far, this weekend in Azerbaijan, just comparatively to his teammate as well, if you look at that. But Sergio Perez has been the 8th best driver, I think, without that kind of head start, I guess, that Red Bull had on everybody else for the first 5 races. Sergio Perez's season would look a little bit more dour than it does in the championship. Fernando Alonso, though, 58 points, just nowhere close to, obviously, the top 8, but also nowhere close to the bottom of the pack either. Fernando Alonso very much in a realm of his own in that Aston Martin. Lance Stroll still 10th. Nico Hülkenberg still 11th. That's what he'll be frustrated about. Nico Hülkenberg, there was definitely a 9th place finish on the cards for him, which would have put him equal with Lance Stroll. And also ahead of Yuki Tsunoda properly. Obviously, he is ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, but not on points yet. And Tsunoda nabbing a point somewhere between here and the end of the season does just feel like Hülkenberg needs that point. And as I said, what has he finished? 11th place so many times this season. Surely there's something coming. I want to say it's like 7 times that Nico Hülkenberg has finished 11th place, which, considering he's picked up 22 points, and you kind of take those point scoring places out, 11th place, like so close that many times, he deserves to be higher than Tsunoda, but he also deserves a couple more points on the board at some point. Yuki Tsunoda in 12th place. Alex Albon jumps up into 13th. Again, equal with an RB, equal with Daniel Ricciardo in 14th on 12 points apiece. Pierre Gasly, then 15th in the driver's standings. Ollie Bearman picks up another point, which puts him a point ahead of Kevin Magnussen, which I absolutely love the storyline there, right? Ollie Bearman continuing. I know he picked up 6 points for Ferrari, hence why I've left them as the Ferrari tag, but the point here for Haas does put him, again, on points ahead of Kevin Magnussen over the course of the season. Esteban Ocon in 18th place with 5 points. Is almost caught by Colapinto. Colapinto gets himself on the board, gets some points for Williams, 4 points, 19th spot for him, and jumps up to 1 point behind Ocon. And I feel like there's more points on the board to come for Colapinto. I feel like there's more points that could arrive. I think when he came in and he was announced just before Monza, I was like, if he can pick up points anywhere in the last 9 races, he's done a stunning job. And he's done that already after 2 races. 7 races left to go. He could easily pick up some more points. Like, I'm looking at Texas. I'm looking at Brazil, Vegas as well. I feel like could be a good Williams track. Qatar to an extent as well. There's definitely points available because this Williams car does just look so good. And that's why I feel a little bit down for Logan Sargent. Like, Logan Sargent's definitely sitting in America somewhere and just sort of wondering what could have been. You know, had he not shunted that Williams car in Zandvoort, is the skill gap between Colapinto and Logan Sargent this big, considering Logan Sargent had a season and a half's worth of experience in Formula One? Probably not. But Colapinto's come in. He's got a bit of dynamic about him. He's fresh. He's hungry. The Williams team have got a bit of positivity about them at the moment. I think he's just come in at just the right time. And you have to hand it to James Vowles. He's absolutely nailed the timing on it. I know his hand was kind of forced, but bringing in Colapinto at that point where the Williams team did just need a little bit of freshness does feel like it's given them a little bit of a boost. Zhou Guanyu, Valtteri Bottas always down at the bottom as well without any points so far this season. We're in for a treat with Bearman next year. I absolutely agree, Justin. Cannot wait to see Ollie Bearman in that Haas full time. Then into the constructor standings. Again, I haven't updated. God, what have I done? Oh, I think I updated it, but sometimes Streamlabs is a bit weird. There we go. McLaren take the top of the constructor standings. 476 points for McLaren. And it does feel like that's done and dusted, doesn't it? It doesn't feel like Red Bull are going to be able to overturn McLaren in the championship. 20 points the gap. In fact, I feel like Red Bull will probably have one eye on Ferrari. And the fact that, you know, Carlos Sainz would have probably finished ahead of Sergio Perez. It was looking very close, but Max Verstappen was adrift of those. And generally speaking, Ferrari have been taking chunk after chunk out of Red Bull as well. It's not just been McLaren taking points away from Red Bull. It's been Ferrari too. And that top 3 could definitely end up being McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull if Red Bull are not careful. In fact, it feels like it will end up being McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, because Ferrari just have so much more momentum behind them at the moment after that upgrade in Monza to their floor. Of course, there is an upgrade coming to Red Bull in Texas, but at the moment, if you were to play out the next 7 races as we've seen the first 3 after the summer break, you would say Ferrari look destined for that second spot. Mercedes in a bit of a no man's land. Aston Martin in a bit of a no man's land. Mercedes 4th, Aston Martin 5th. RB are going to be looking at that 5-point gap to Haas. It's gonna be get squeaky, isn't it? It's gonna be close between them. RB started the season so well. Haas started the season pretty well as well, but ended up getting a little bit unlucky here and there. As I touched upon, Nico Hülkenberg finishing 11th place. Haas will feel like they deserve that 6th place in the Constructors' Championship on sort of the average performances that they've been able to put in this season. Williams jump up into 8th spot, 10-point swing. Like, that is a huge chunk of points for those cars down towards the bottom end. Like, if you think in 16 races so far this season, Williams have been able to get 6 points. And then in one race, one mad race in Azerbaijan, a couple of the big boys drop out. Hamilton has a poor race. And suddenly, you're right in the mix once again. 16 points. And it feels like RB and Haas are too far away. But I think at one point I said Williams might feel like they're a bit too far away from Alpine, considering where they were towards the end of the first half of the season just before the summer break. And Alpine now in ninth spot, 13 points, looks so far adrift of the pace this weekend, even with the really skinny rear wing they were running. Just couldn't get anything to really work. Gasly was in the mix amongst it. Esteban Ocon had a nightmare weekend. And Stakes Sauber, it wasn't the absolute dreadful weekend that Stakes Sauber kind of normally have, I guess you would say. But still 0 points on the board so far this season. The only team not to score a point, and they don't look like scoring a point anytime soon. Goodness gracious me. I don't think he's already comparing next year. There's only a few races left. There is only a few races left, but my goodness me, it's coming around quickly, and I'm very, very excited for 2025, mainly because of this man here, Oscar Piastri, our race winner. Have to take it. Like, he was stunning. And obviously, Piastri began this weekend being informed that he was to be the McLaren second driver, the second act in the McLaren team, the support driver, the number 2, however you want to form that sentence. He has been stunningly quick over the last 7 races. He has been the quickest of anybody in the last 7 races. And I think he took the fact that the team said, come on, Oscar, you're a number 2 now, a little bit to heart. We've got to remember, he's got Mark Webber in his ear, telling him, look, Seb, even when you're told 20, what was it? Mode 21? No, that's not the words. Something 21. Multi 21. He's gonna be in Oscar Piastri's ear. Multi 21. They told me I could stay in front of Sebastian. They told me that I could. They told me I was in with a chance for a championship at Red Bull. They never gave it to me. And Oscar Piastri's gonna have that in his ears. He's gonna be thinking, well, Uncle Mark, you're telling me this? I guess I'm gonna have to do it. I guess I'm gonna have to try and be this number 1 and displace this Lando Norris character inside of his own team. Got to remember, Lando Norris is the McLaren man. He's been a McLaren junior, came through the junior program with McLaren, came in when they were a really tough time with Carlos Sainz alongside him. They kind of rebuilt the team. Then he became the number 1, even though Daniel Ricciardo was brought in to be that big name player. Lando Norris displaced him. McLaren has become Lando Norris's throne, right? But Oscar Piastri coming in, absolutely not bothered by any of that. And Oscar Piastri, okay, yeah, he's still 32 points away from Lando Norris. I'm not saying that Oscar Piastri is going to be the next driver to win the Drivers' World Championship this season. Like, I'm not saying, let's move Lando Norris aside and try and get Oscar Piastri this Drivers' Championship, because he's still 91 points off Max Verstappen at this point. But it does feel like Oscar Piastri has got all of those little pieces falling into place just at this moment in time where, at the beginning of the year, I still had my concerns about his tyre degradation. I still had his concerns about his overtaking prowess. I still had my concerns about how he does over longer race stints and whether he can keep up that momentum throughout the whole race, because it wasn't just his tyre degradation, but even after the race today, he came out in the press conference and was like, my back hurts. He is still growing, and he's still very young, and he's still very raw. It's only his second season in Formula One, But he does feel like he's ticking off all those boxes. And this Grand Prix, actually, I feel like was Oscar Piastri's real statement drive of, I am ready to battle for championships. Because as I said, they were the 2 things coming into the season in terms of his driving that I was worried about. His tyre degradation, and also his ability to overtake in tough situations. Like, you think all the way back to somewhere like Saudi Arabia at the beginning of the season, where he was stuck behind Lewis Hamilton for so long, where he should have been able to get that McLaren in front, but wasn't able to. But today, he did both of those things. His tyre degradation was perfect, went onto the one-stop strategy, got those hard compound tyres to the end, kept hold of them a little bit better than Charles Leclerc behind him. Oh, okay, yes, Charles Leclerc's in the dirty air. It is a lot harder for the car behind. But the reason that Charles Leclerc was behind and the reason Oscar Piastri was able to do that with his tyres is because of that brilliant lunge on Charles Leclerc, the overtaking prowess. He saw the opportunity and he took it. He knew that he was only going to have a few opportunities to really lunge at Charles Leclerc. And it kind of reminded me of the other Australian on the grid, Daniel Ricciardo. Those lunges from deep that Daniel Ricciardo used to be known for. The latest of the late breakers. The man who will put his car on the apex and just make you watch as he drives past you. And it was one of those from Oscar Piastri. Dove up the inside. Could Charles Leclerc have done a little bit more? Maybe. But a really, really solid drive from Oscar Piastri. And as I said before, Oscar Piastri has now outscored everybody else on the grid for the last 7 races. And he just pulled off one of the best races, probably the best race of his career. I wasn't talking, not just Formula One, but all the way through the categories. It had everything. He was brilliant, absolutely stunning. And it just feels like going into this weekend, the fact that he was told, well, Oscar, you're a number 2 for this year now. We're going to look at it again in Singapore and see whether or not we can kind of keep this papaya rules change in the mix. And actually, going into 2025, if Oscar Piastri continues this form and clicks into it at the beginning of next season and the McLaren car is still where it is right now, there is no reason that Oscar Piastri cannot be in the mix for winning the Formula One World Championship. There is no reason whatsoever that we should be saying, well, Lando Norris will be the world champion if McLaren have the fastest car. We could end up with a Hamilton-Rosberg style championship, with a Webber-Vettel style championship, where Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris go toe-to-toe throughout, and it really does go down to the wire. I think Oscar has got everything he needs to now. And that will worry Lando Norris. That will worry Lando Norris because, as I said, he was kind of the main man at McLaren. And I think now, Norris obviously pointed out that there could have been a lot more from this weekend. And the Sunday that he got, if we look at just the Sunday, it was a good drive. But qualifying, if it hadn't have gone wrong, if he hadn't have got that yellow flag, if they'd have just got a banker lap in, that was the thing I said before the Grand Prix. And obviously it went live before the Grand Prix itself and was talking about Lando Norris's qualifying time. He was more than capable of getting through Q1. It's not like he threw it away or he made a mistake, but more just the team. The fact that, you know, you have the opportunity to do 3 laps in Q1. Maybe they were a little bit cocky. Maybe they just didn't realize that the track was going to evolve in that way, but throwing away that opportunity to get into Q2. And obviously on a track like Baku, I think you have to anticipate a red flag, a crash, a problem for a driver in Baku because it happens so often. You know, this is the first time in a long time we haven't had a full safety car at Baku. It does normally happen. And even then, there was a virtual safety car at the end. We saw people crash in free practice 1, in free practice 2, in free practice 3. We saw drivers going down the escape road. We know that this is a track where something like that can happen. And Lando Norris kind of misjudging his banker lap, not getting a clean lap in before Esteban Ocon then was going slowly. And I've heard a few people also saying, well, should it have been a yellow flag? Should Lando have got a yellow flag when he was going past Ocon? I think he had to. I think Baku is so high speed, that third sector in particular is so high speed that if Lando Norris hadn't been shown a yellow flag and just came across Esteban Ocon, I know that the team is also radioing into Lando and telling him, like, you know, there's a slow moving car ahead, etc., etc. But at that point in the racetrack, if he just slams into the back of Esteban Ocon, right? And instead, we're looking at this from the other perspective and we're going, why didn't they yellow flag it? How would they not yellow flag it? That's so dangerous because Ocon was hit and Lando Norris could have been injured and Ocon could have been injured. And there was a huge melee and debris and various bits and pieces. Like, if you look at it from the other sort of extreme, right, where they don't yellow flag it and maybe Lando Norris hits Esteban Ocon, it becomes a much, much bigger problem and a much bigger safety problem in Formula One. And therefore, I think they had to do it. I think that the right decision was made to pull out the yellow flag just for that, even though it was the tiniest part of the track. It was 0.1 of a sector or whatever it was. And Lando Norris was a second and a bit faster than Fernando Alonso, who was P15 in Q1 at the time. Could have completely changed the complexion of Fernando Alonso's weekend as well, to be fair. Just so frustrating. And Lando Norris, obviously, as I said, positive after the race about the race, but generally frustrated. And in his post-race interview, you can understand it, but looked like if he was given a different opportunity, if there was maybe even a little bit more clean air for him in the race, maybe things could have been different because he was so quick. Once Alex Albon pitted, I think that was the problem, right? He couldn't get past Alex Albon in that middle portion of the race, had Max Verstappen behind him where he wanted him, but couldn't get there in the right way. And Alex Albon was also costing him a little bit of time. I don't think Lando Norris would have been able to... Would he have been able to catch George Russell? Maybe on another day. I don't think Lando Norris would have caught, Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez, anyone like that. But I do feel like George Russell, maybe, if there was just a little bit more clean air for Lando Norris through that middle stint of the race, he did really well on the hard compound tyres. Did very, very well indeed. But yeah, I think it will be one of those weekends that, again, and we've said this so many times throughout the season for Lando Norris, it'll be one of those weekends again where a tiny mistake, a small procedural error, things that could have gone his way, things that he could have rectified had he known, or little bit of hindsight there. Just frustrating for him, wasn't it? But yeah, I think, again, he'll look at it. 3 points gained on Verstappen nonetheless, and Verstappen's weekend was absolutely rough. So there's some positives there for McLaren in the fact that moving into Singapore, they will again smell blood and they will again think, right, Lando, this time we cannot get this wrong. Because that could be, I feel like Singapore, if there's going to be a race where there's a 25-point swing, so Lando wins and Verstappen gets nothing, probably going to be Singapore. And that's just because after that in Texas, Red Bull have got their upgrade coming. And also the fact that Singapore is one of those tracks. I mean, even last year in 2023, it was the one track that Max Verstappen didn't win between, race 5 and the end of the season. So it's the one opportunity where I feel like McLaren will really, really feel like that can be the moment for a big swing in the points. And suddenly, with a 25-point swing, then it becomes a more realistic opportunity for Lando Norris in the championship. But I think that's what he's really been missing, right? Even though he was stunning in the Netherlands, it was only 8 points in the swing. Even though he was much, much quicker than Verstappen in Monza, again, it was only 8 points. And then this weekend, again, so much quicker. Verstappen had a terrible weekend. Lando Norris saved his race, still only 3 points gained. So you're looking at 19 points gained in those 3 races. But if he can get a 25-point swing, or even like an 18, 20-point swing, however that may be possible, something along those lines in Singapore, then it comes back to life again. Then that challenge for the championship really does ramp up once more. So that's what Lando Norris will be looking ahead at Singapore, and he will think, this was a missed opportunity, but can't miss an opportunity again. And, he's missed a few opportunities. He's missed a few opportunities over the season, hasn't he? He missed an opportunity in Canada, you could argue. He missed an opportunity in Great Britain for a win as well. Obviously, the Hungary controversy, but I feel like that was the correct decision by the team. But Singapore is like the last one. The last really big opportunity for Lando Norris to really jump into it. Oh, yeah. Good point. Good point. The flexi rear wing on the McLaren. Actually, have I got a picture of it? Probably. Should I get a picture of it somewhere? Here you go. It's not going to fit in the box in any way. Can I fit it in the box? Maybe. The flexi rear wing on the McLaren. Those dastardly McLaren boys. Have you seen this news? I didn't really know about this too much until, again, like my McLaren bias was pretty high this weekend, so I wasn't looking at the negativity around the team. But there has been a little bit of a talk around the flexi rear wing on the McLaren car. I'll be honest with you, I was very worried about McLaren's straight line speed this weekend because I saw that they were running sort of a medium drag rear wing in comparison to Ferrari, who were running like a low medium to low. Even Alpine were running like a Monza spec rear wing. They were running like a super low rear wing. And then I was looking at McLaren, I was like, how are they going to get away with running probably the highest downforce rear wing? I genuinely thought it was a play from McLaren to optimize the car in Sector 1, Sector 2, hope that benefits them enough in qualifying that they can kind of be right at the front of the pack. And then, even though they won't have the straight line speed to maybe do the overtakes, they'll still be there, and they'll have the benefit of DRS in the race. So they'll try and play it off a little bit more, and maybe hope that the straight line speed advantage that running a slightly lower end rear wing would have given them. However, this is where the controversy comes in. Is it illegal? Is it not? That's what I mean. It's legal, isn't it? Or is it? Lots of people saying different things. Lots of people kind of quoting the various bits and pieces. In fact, let me find the rear wing. McLaren rear wing. I think it was multi-viewer, actually, that I was looking at. There we go, multi-viewer, literally the first one that comes up as you look at it. So, here we go. Article 3.10.10, drag reduction system, DRS. Furthermore, Part F. The design is such that failure of the system will result in the uppermost closed section returning to normal high incidence position. Any alteration in the incidence of the uppermost closed section may only be commanded by direct driver input and controlled using the control electronics specified in Article 8.3. Effectively, the rear wing is only supposed to open when you tell it to open, when you press the button, right? So it's supposed to be completely closed up until the point where you press the DRS button. Now, if you look at the tiny little lip, so there's a red line running across the top of the rear wing. I should have got this on the iPad. It would have been lovely to draw on it. But there's a little red line running across the top of the rear wing. If you look at the uppermost part, you can see how just where the sort of end plate of the rear wing meets the actual letterbox part of the rear wing, right at the back, there's just a little lip. Just a little lip on it. Actually, let me show you. So it looks like this normally. Closed, right? It looks like that normally. You can see, okay, there's no little lip there. Bang. Little tiny lip. Little tiny lip. Let me show you bigger. Little tiny lip that opens up. Just to the rear wing there. See that? Normal. Little lip. Normal. Little lip. Beautifully explained, but it just looks like it's opening the tiniest little bit. And that supposedly has been picked up by a few of the teams, picked up by fans as well, because obviously we get to see this angle. There are cameras on top of the car. We can see it. And why would it not be legal? Because that's sort of not supposed to happen, but also it's like a mini DRS, right? It's opening the tiniest little bit, which does reduce the drag on the rear wing and does allow the car to go that tiny little bit quicker, right? It's illegal because the DRS should be the only thing that opens that letterbox, whereas it's opening without the DRS button being pressed. However, when it comes to flexible components, and this is always the problem with Formula One and the regulations and flexibility of components and what that really means and how that really works. The flexibility and the flexible nature of the rear wing is tested. It is something that the FIA take the cars in and they test. But they only test it while the car is stationary. How are they supposed to test it while the car is moving? So they test it while the car is stationary. They put however many newtons of force onto the rear wing. They see whether it bends. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. Passes the test, moves on, right? It's like with anything else. It's a bit like when they measured Alex Albon's floor and it was 0.3 millimeters out and he got disqualified from qualifying in Zandvoort, right? 0.3 millimeters. They literally, on race day, got a file and just took it off. Like it was the tiniest fraction of an amount, but it matters. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And with McLaren here, if that rear wing is tested by the FIA, which it will be almost every single race weekend, if it's tested, they put the newtons on it and it doesn't move. And they've found a way that whilst, yes, we can see that it opens whilst it's under force on the track. If it doesn't open whilst it's under force during the test, it is legal. And therefore, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, it is flexing. We can all see it's flexing. We can see that that shouldn't really be the case considering the rules. But it does pass all of the FIA's tests and standards that they do before the race and after the race and during the race weekend. And they check all of these things. Flexibility is such a big gray area. And this is just another example of that. I think it was even the McLaren and the Ferrari team. It was McLaren and Mercedes, and Ferrari complained about McLaren and Mercedes last weekend in Monza for their front wings. There's always something. There's always going to be a little bit, and there's always manipulations of the rules and things that they're like finding in their favor. And effectively, what McLaren have done here. There was even talk about the McLaren brake ducts earlier on in the season, if you remember that as well. What McLaren have done here is they found a tiny gain on everybody else that passes the rules, but out on track doesn't quite follow the kind of sportsmanship of the rules itself. Is a huge gray area, and I'd love to know your guys' thoughts on it, because I've seen some people go one way completely and say that it should be illegal, they should be banned, blah blah blah, should get rid of that rear wing, and I feel like the FIA probably will step in and touch up the rules in one way or another. They kind of do on this kind of stuff a lot of the time. Sort of throughout the season, they'll make tiny tweaks to the wording of various rules and bits and pieces. Maybe they just allow it for all of the teams. Maybe they disallow it for McLaren. We'll have to wait and see. But it's one of those things where, really good point in the chat. When you're putting things under pressure, under load, it will never actually compare to the downforce that the car is doing at speed. And McLaren have, maybe in the wind tunnel, maybe through just iterations during free practice sessions over the course of the season, they've found a way to just manipulate that tiny gap in the rear wing. And it's just given them, on these huge straights in Baku, it's maybe giving them 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers an hour. But those fine margins in Formula One really do matter. And that's what's kind of taken them that next step on. And that's what's maybe, allowed Oscar Piastri to win this race this weekend, because it was a very close battle between him and Charles Leclerc. And let's talk about another team. Charles Leclerc is another one of those for Charles Leclerc in it. Another pole position. Another just heartbreaking second place finish in Baku. As I said at the top of this, it does feel like Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc just sort of trading wins at this point. They were like, well, you'd prefer to win in Italy, right? Being in a Ferrari. I'll give you the win there. I'll come in second place in Monza. You give me the win back in Azerbaijan. And I'll take that one. And it's just kind of Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri. Imagine that title battle, by the way. Imagine that title battle. I know that we always talk about, it'd be lovely to see Verstappen versus Hamilton again, or Verstappen versus Leclerc. I want to see a Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri title battle. I feel like that would be very fun to see. Two drivers who are kind of much better in qualifying, but do have a little bit about them in the race. I feel like that would be tight throughout the season. But as I said, Charles Leclerc is another one of those curses, isn't it? 4th year in a row, 4th pole position. At least he ticked off the Monaco curse. He's getting through the curses. Is Charles Leclerc. He's got a lot of them. It is weird how cursed Charles Leclerc is at various tracks, isn't it? And I think it's just because he's so quick at some circuits. Like I was saying this again before the Grand Prix. When you look at Baku as a circuit, it just feels like Charles Leclerc has absolutely mastered every single corner. And when Charles Leclerc masters a track, it is like obscene. Like he is by far and away the quickest driver in Formula One. And what I mean by that is, like, on one lap in qualifying, Charles Leclerc is undoubtedly the best driver in Formula One. Like, if I was like to put my life on the line and they said, like, right, you've got to pick one driver and he's got to do a lap of Azerbaijan in this time, Charles Leclerc is my man. Like, I'm picking him 10 times out of 10. He is so good when it comes to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and just qualifying in general. But yeah, 4 races in a row where he's picked up pole position. And this did feel like his best chance at a win as well. I feel like the other ones are different. You know, you look at 2021 and the Verstappen-Hamilton title battle, and both of those cars were always going to be a little bit quicker than him on race day. Similar in 22 and 23, the dominance of the Red Bull, Max Verstappen just winning race after race after race in both of those seasons. It once again felt like Charles Leclerc was never really going to be able to hold on to that pole position in 22 or 23. This year felt like his year, didn't it? It felt like this was the one. It felt like finally Charles Leclerc was going to have that opportunity to win from pole in Azerbaijan. And it just slipped away right at the end. Leclerc bottled those first few laps on the hard tyres. Do you think? I think the problem was he was under pressure. He was under pressure, Mr. Pulse. And Ferrari said it. Charles Leclerc said it on the radio. He was like, how is Piastri and Perez pushing this hard? Because he was in the middle of the two, wasn't he? He was trying to get Piastri. He was trying to defend from Perez after Piastri had made that lunge and move up the inside. He was trying to hold on to the back of the McLaren. He was like, what am I missing? They must have so much more grip or so much better tyre degradation or something, because Charles Leclerc just seemed like in no man's land. I think he had to push on those hard compound tyres because otherwise he'd have been left. And, you know, he wanted that victory back, and he was within contention of Oscar Piastri with 5 laps left to go. And then, yeah, just a little bit too strong on those hard compound tyres. Also, the fact that he was behind Oscar Piastri, as I said before, it is a little bit harder to hold onto your tyres in the dirty air when you're behind the car. So it did feel like going into those final few laps, the fact that the Ferrari had been right underneath right underneath Oscar Piastri for that time. Whilst I think Sergio Perez did something quite clever, and I mentioned this at points during the live stream, just the fact that he dropped off, you know, just the fact that Sergio Perez was 2 seconds adrift of Charles Leclerc at points, just getting himself a tiny little bit more free air, just allowing those tyres to cool down a touch and hold on to them that little bit better. But that's very true. Yeah, Charles Leclerc was very slow. 6-second gap, disappeared in 3 or 4 laps. Yeah, it was once those tyres were gone, they were gone, weren't they? It was that thing. Once the tyres in the Ferrari car, and Charles Leclerc said it on the radio, once the rear end tyres were shot, they were shot. And there was absolutely no coming back from it. And I suppose I don't know who you lay that on, though. Do you lay that on Charles Leclerc because he's pushing, but at the same time, we kept hearing on the radio, the Ferrari team, go on, Charles, go for it, push, try and get Piastri, keep him under pressure, go for it. Like, we kept hearing that over and over and over again. So it's no, like, mean feat that Charles Leclerc kept pushing and kept thinking that he could go for it. So maybe you lay that at Ferrari's door, or do you lay it on Charles Leclerc's door? Because he's obviously got the feeling of the car. He knew that the tyres were going to go off. He has that kind of, I don't know, innate feeling that drivers have when they're in the car and they can just feel it slipping that tiny bit more than they expect it to. I don't know. It just, like, the whole race, Oscar Piastri made Charles Leclerc's life a misery. Like, continually pushing him and then eventually getting past. And also then Sergio Perez coming into it. It's just everything that Charles Leclerc didn't need, wasn't it? He was hoping for just a lovely, clean race until the end. He got there, right? He had a 5-second gap before the first pit stops. He was disappearing up the road. Piastri was struggling on the medium tyres. Then as soon as they switched onto the hard compound tyres, completely changed. Piastri seemed to have that pace. Piastri then, that lunge, that wonderful little dive from Oscar Piastri, got himself into first place, and Charles Leclerc then just left a little bit for dead, and maybe can feel a little bit positive about the fact that he held on to second. Because, you know, Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez were right there at the end. And we'll talk about those two coming together and the fact that Charles Leclerc played his part in the fact that Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez came together as well. But, yeah, towards the end... Oh, there you go. Yeah, towards the end, Mr. Pulse has put it perfectly. Can't blame anyone. He's pushing for the win. He has to keep going. Ferrari are desperate to go back-to-back, right? If they can win in Monza, win in Azerbaijan, and get back-to-back victories for the first time in a long time, that's then like a real statement from Charles Leclerc. They wanted it, but just couldn't quite get there. Talking of back-to-back wins, though, Verstappen has been a very, very long way away from back-to-back wins. Hasn't won in 7 Grand Prix now, and it feels like an alternate universe. Because you think, coming into 2022, the regulation changes, a lot of positivity around, like, ooh, what's he going to be able to do? Who's going to be on top in 2022? And then just complete annihilation from Verstappen, breaking every record that there's been. Now hasn't won a race in 7. It feels kind of strange. Feels kind of weird. Fans are bored by Max Verstappen not winning a race in such a long time. And honestly, this felt like Max Verstappen's, I'm going to say, worst race of the season. I know it's not his worst result because he came in 5th place and he's had worse results over the year. I know that he wasn't, that far off the pace of the cars in front. Although you can talk about Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc causing each other headaches. And that allowed the rest of the pack to kind of catch up. You talk about Carlos Sainz catching up towards the end. He has to thank the fact that Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez were bickering amongst one another, whilst Carlos Sainz could just put in qualifying lap after qualifying lap and kind of close that gap. But Max Verstappen, as I said, not his worst result, but I feel like his worst race. Once you obviously take away that last pit stop, where I can understand it, but I also don't quite understand where he was going with that final pit stop, because on one hand, okay, I understand, go onto the soft compound tyre, maybe the virtual safety car comes in and you can go for the fastest lap on the final lap of the race. Like, I kind of understand it. But if you'd have seen the incident, seen where it was, and seen the fact that Sergio Perez's and Carlos Sainz's cars had effectively become one, there was no way that virtual safety car was not going to be the way that the race ended. And I think Red Bull actually got a little bit of a slap on the wrist by the FIA and by the stewards for coming in and doing that pit stop and being a little bit kind of too ballsy during the virtual safety car conditions, even though he was miles ahead of Fernando Alonso behind. And obviously it didn't change anything, the fact that he went onto those soft compound tires, but it felt a bit strange for him to do so. I think the reason I call this Max Verstappen's worst race of the season is because he was kind of beaten by Sergio Perez, and beaten by Sergio Perez well. Like, it's the first time in a very, very long time that I've felt like Sergio Perez had the advantage. In fact, probably Baku last season, which, remember, was right at the beginning of last season, was the last time I think Sergio Perez had the upper hand on Max Verstappen in any session, let alone, during the actual Grand Prix itself. And the fact that Sergio Perez was right up there, Sergio Perez was in contention for the podium places consistently throughout the entire race, the fact that Sergio Perez outqualified his teammate, the fact that Sergio Perez was maybe in the mix for the victory, you could even argue right at the end. Like, I never felt like Sergio Perez was going to get both Leclerc and Piastri. It felt like he was going to get one of them because he was kind of waiting for a mistake, wasn't he? Sergio Perez was like, oh, okay, if Charles Leclerc lunges on Piastri, a little bit like what Carlos Sainz ended up doing, like, if they go for a lunge, I can maybe also gain a place on the other one. So it felt like Sergio Perez's top finish possibility was sort of second for me. But you could argue he was in the mix for the victory, whilst Max Verstappen was nowhere near. Max Verstappen miles off being in contention for the victory. And honestly, felt like Max Verstappen's most incomplete performance of the season, because I've been very much on the side that, yes, okay, McLaren can look back at races and they can look back at Lando Norris performances and maybe feel like he should have picked up wins and he should have picked up points here and there. But Max Verstappen's been very good this season at just picking up every point available to him. This race, did he pick up every point available to him? Maybe not. But then also inherited 2 positions right at the end, which kind of jumped him up. There's positive signs. I think generally the fact that Sergio Perez was much, much better, even on a track that is his kind of best track of the season. It's one of those speciality tracks for Sergio Perez, isn't it? And that came to the fore. But I don't know. The fact that Max Verstappen was so outdone by Sergio Perez is not a great sign for him. But a big upgrade coming in Texas. We have now got that fully guaranteed by Red Bull. So Singapore is probably going to be the same kind of thing for Max Verstappen, but a big upgrade coming in Texas. And honestly, if you're Red Bull at this point in the season, I think, the Constructors' Championship is gone. So Red Bull have to just put every single thing that they possibly can into this year. There's no point in them really worrying about next year. I feel like they have to guarantee the driver standings this year, because if they don't, going into next year is an absolute sort of fire at the moment. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 2025. McLaren could be the quickest. Ferrari could be the quickest. Mercedes could be the quickest going into 2025. It really does feel like they're all right in the mix and in contention for moving up into being the fastest car on the grid. So I feel like Red Bull just need that upgrade, and they need that upgrade to work right bloody now. Let's talk about it then. Let's talk about it. I've talked about Charles Leclerc. I've talked about Max Verstappen. I've got to talk about their teammates. And again, I'm going to ask you guys in the chat, who was to blame? Who do you think was at fault? Because Oscar Piastri said it after the race. He said that those two have been colliding all weekend. I think they'd been in the stewards' room together 2, maybe 3 times even before this incident. So it's just one of those weekends where they kept bumping heads, and it just culminated right at the end. 2 laps to go, smash into the barriers, both of them. And Charles Leclerc kind of played his part a little bit. The fact that Charles Leclerc's tyres went so off the boil and it opened this opportunity for this collision to happen, because I was talking about it during the race. Like, it would be, I think it was when Lando Norris and Alex Albon had gone super long on the hard compound tyres. I was like, right, if there's a safety car now, Lando Norris could actually win this race. And then I was looking down the field and I was like, everybody's a bit too far away from each other at this point in the race for a safety car to be really likely. But everyone kind of pinched up towards the end, particularly Carlos Sainz catching up to the back of the front 3. And then Charles Leclerc, obviously, so they're going down in towards turn 1. Charles Leclerc defends his second place position against Sergio Perez. That allowed Carlos Sainz to kind of nip in, a little bit like what I was saying Sergio Perez was waiting for between Leclerc and Piastri. Carlos Sainz waited for that, nipped in, got in front of Sergio Perez, up the inside of turn 1. And then I feel like Carlos Sainz gets a little bit greedy. He's a little bit greedy because he realizes that obviously because Charles Leclerc has had to maneuver around Sergio Perez a little bit, Sergio Perez has had to maneuver around Charles Leclerc, he gets that position on Checo. But then he sees Charles Leclerc ahead of him, and he sees his Ferrari teammate, the man who is displacing him, because Lewis Hamilton is coming in and Carlos Sainz being getting rid of while Charles Leclerc is being kept. He sees that and he gets a little bit greedy to Carlos Sainz, and he sees the opening. He tries to go around the outside at turn 2, and Carlos Sainz then went really wide at turn 2. And that was just disaster. If you go really wide at turn 2, we saw it with George Russell at the start when he was battling with Verstappen. Like, you just absolutely bog down. You've got no grip and you're going nowhere. So then Sergio Perez comes back at him, right? Charles Leclerc disappears up the road, manages to get there. And then Carlos Sainz, because he's a little bit greedy, goes around the outside. Sergio Perez just gets his front wing and that front right-hand tyre up alongside him. And then the two collide on the exit of turn 2. And it's very, very close. Carlos Sainz said that he kept his regular racing line. That was his quote. Sergio Perez said, in my opinion, Carlos moved too quickly to follow the toe of Charles. So he thinks Sergio thinks that Carlos Sainz only had eyes for his teammate and wasn't really paying attention to the Mexican beside him. But the FIA, the stewards, Formula One deemed it as a racing incident. And both were assumed, I think, both kind of took a little bit of responsibility. I think both drivers assumed the other one was going to move because it was a bit of a weird incident, right? It wasn't like Carlos Sainz was pressed up against the wall or Sergio Perez was pressed up against the wall and had nowhere to go. They both had quite a bit of track either side of them. Like Sergio Perez could have easily moved to the left and Carlos Sainz could have easily moved to the right, and neither of these incidents and this incident would have happened. Neither of the cars would have collided. But they both just kind of veered into each other. It was like they were both kind of looking at the Charles Leclerc's car in front of them, to be honest with you, and they just kind of banged together. But yeah, the stewards deciding it was a racing incident. Perez probably for his future flashing before his eyes, went for it. I don't think he went for it as such. I think he earned that position because Carlos Sainz was so slow out of turn 2, and because Carlos Sainz, in trying to get past Charles Leclerc, did leave the door open. So Sergio Perez, he's a racer. He saw the line, he went for it. Definitely had to go for it. Sainz is at fault. Right, this is how I see it. And Mr. Pulse has kind of said it as well. Racing incident. Neither driver turned the wheel. That's what I mean. I think they were both just like, they didn't realize. Maybe they thought they were parallel lines, and they just weren't quite parallel lines. And they didn't quite see themselves coming to a point where they were actually going to collide. I think they were both just trying to get in Charles Leclerc's slipstream, and they just kind of... I think racing incident is fair enough. And I think you can make the case, if you're the FIA or the stewards, obviously neither driver ended up getting a penalty and it was just called a racing incident. I feel like on the flip side of it, they could have argued that both drivers kind of deserved to get a penalty of some sort. I feel like you can look at it that way. If you don't want this kind of thing to happen ever again, you could penalise both drivers, give them a couple of penalty points, something like that. Penalise both drivers and then show that this kind of thing, because it was dangerous. Like, there was a lot of debris on the track, big shunt, high-speed shunt. Could have given both drivers a little bit of a telling off, considering they both had track to run into on either side. But I think both drivers lost enough in the fact that one of them should have been on the podium, if not both of them should have been on the podium. And it did kind of steal away from us being able to see a real battle for second place, because Charles Leclerc's tyres were completely shot. And it would have been really interesting to see who'd have come out on top between Leclerc, Perez and Sainz, and who would have ended up being that top of the drivers of those three. I think Piastri had disappeared too far along the way, but maybe that's punishment enough. They don't need the penalty points. Yeah, 1 penalty point each. I feel like that if it was me, I'd maybe have looked at the possibility of giving that. Just 1 penalty point each, both of them to blame effectively. And instead of calling it like a racing incident where both drivers kind of get away scot-free, if that makes sense, even though they're both at fault. Like, they are definitely both at fault for this, and therefore getting away with nothing, I suppose, is one of those things. But yeah, I suppose losing out on a podium, losing out on so many points, losing out on Sainz now is so far adrift of the top 4 in the driver's standings. Sergio Perez drops behind Russell in the driver's standings. Like, punishment enough, you know? Like, they lost out on everything that they'd worked really, really hard for. Both of them had great races. As I said, I think this is Sergio Perez's best race of the season so far. I think he was stunningly quick and got the better of Max Verstappen in every single element of the weekend. And then same for Carlos Sainz. I thought he was very quick. I think Carlos Sainz has kind of drifted away from it as his time at Ferrari is coming towards an end. I expected it to happen. The second half of the season is going to be harder for Carlos Sainz because they are going to position that Ferrari car more and more in Charles Leclerc's favour, and also have one eye on Lewis Hamilton coming in, starting to manoeuvre the car towards what Lewis Hamilton would also like, which is more like what Charles Leclerc enjoys out of a car. So it's going to be a tough second half of the season. But the fact that Carlos Sainz was able to catch up to the top of the top 3 and was able to put in that really solid stint at the end, I think was a massive positive for him. And then both of them just threw away any positives, because now we have to talk about a crash rather than any of the good driving that they did. Let's move on to Mercedes. I feel like I've waffled on. As I said, this is going to feel like a long one, but there's a lot to talk about after this race. Mercedes, I'll kind of keep it brief. George Russell got a podium. Wasn't happy about the podium. It was weird. I think it's the first driver in a long time. Well, I suppose Lando Norris is pretty somber when he's on the podium a lot of the time as well. But first time that I've seen George Russell pick up a podium place. Obviously, actually, he hasn't been on the podium since Austria, has he? So George Russell, just the inheriting podium position man, because obviously disqualified from Belgium, which should have been a win and was a very, very good drive from George Russell. Apart from that, I think the last time he was on the podium was Austria. I might be wrong. I could be having a blank there. But he was just really unhappy to get a podium finish and was so annoyed. And I think, obviously, coming into the weekend, they wanted a bit more. And just coming into the second half of the season, they wanted a bit more, didn't they? You know, you see them winning 3 out of the last 4 races, a 1-2 in Belgium on the road that with that disqualification just obviously dropped Russell out of the running. But I feel like they expected a bit more from the second half of the season, and it just hasn't quite gone their direction. And then also he's got Singapore hanging over his head, and he knows that everybody going into Singapore is going to be talking about last year and the crash on the final race, so on the final few laps, and the fact that he threw away a possibility of victory there in Singapore, and Carlos Sainz then ended up getting it. He knows that that's around the corner as well. So a pretty somber and negative weekend from George Russell. And then similarly for Lewis Hamilton, like couldn't get anything out of the car. Obviously had that power unit change between qualifying and the race, so ended up starting from the pit lane. It was, I mean, is there any positives from Lewis Hamilton? I suppose he did at least drive back up into the points, but he didn't even drive back up into the points and then get to the back of the kind of top 4 pack. Lewis Hamilton finishing in 9th, behind both Williamses, behind the Aston Martin. You know, when you're looking at Mercedes not even being in that kind of top 8 positions, finishing in 9th place is a pretty tough pill to swallow, even though he did start from the pit lane. Yeah, not the weekend. Not the weekend for Mercedes at all. And again, this is the fluctuation of the season, right? Before the summer break, it was all positive Mercedes and it was slightly negative Ferrari. Now it's completely swapped, doesn't it? It's all positive Ferrari, Charles Leclerc being talked about, stunning drives, etc., winning Grand Prix, blah, 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 blah. And now Mercedes just seem to have fallen away from it. McLaren have kind of also up and down, but generally have been able to be competitive at every single Grand Prix. But it does feel like Ferrari and Mercedes have kind of flip-flopped as to who's then in contention, you know what I mean? As the Red Bulls have also kind of dipped away from the front of the standings. Well, I say Red Bulls, Max Verstappen has dipped away from the front of the standings. And talking of that, Williams back. Are they back? Doing the kind of Harry Potter Voldemort thing. He's back. Alex Albon is back. And Colapinto is good. But yeah, Williams, obviously that Perez Sainz shunt that we just talked about upgraded their 9th and 10th place, which is already something to absolutely scream about, but it's only 3 points. It upgraded that 3 points to a 7th and 8th place, which then becomes 10 points. And it's like, I think Alex Albon, even coming into this weekend, was talking about, you know, the fact that there hasn't been an insane race this season. Someone, like, you know, you look at the podium finishes and there hasn't been like a Haas pick up a random podium or an RB pick up a random podium or anything like that. But the Williams cars, coming into this weekend, there was a lot of good things moving in the right direction for them. That upgrade at Silverstone and the way that they've been able to then upgrade minimal bits and pieces on the car since then, and taken weight off the car as well. Like, so many things went so wrong for them at the beginning of the year. And then in Zandvoort, with that Sargent shunt, it felt like it was going to be like history repeating itself just like 6 months later, where they were going to start off the second half of the season how they started the first half of the season, with a couple of shunts, ruining the cars, having to send them back to the factory. But no, like Zandvoort, Alex Albon was in the top 10, but then got disqualified. As I said, 0.3 of a millimeter in Zandvoort for Alex Albon. That is nothing. Obviously, that then disqualifies him. He drops out of the top 10, isn't able to get back into the points there. Then back-to-back points finishes for Alex Albon. And then even in Monza, you could argue Colapinto on debut maybe should have picked up points, because had it not been for that mistake where he dipped into the gravel during Q1 in Monza, he probably would have got through Q1 fairly comfortably, maybe even been, you know, in contention for Q3 places. It would have been close, but maybe in contention for Q3 place. I mean, he was so quick in Q2. He was 6th fastest in Q2. Colapinto ridiculously quick, and both of the Williams cars doing separate strategies, but still actually catching each other back up out on track. And Albon finishing just ahead of his teammate Colapinto. Very, very good. Just very good. So many positives for Williams. So much positivity around them. And I saw a few people, and kind of Claire mentioned it on the post race. Logan Sargent, like, you've got on one hand, obviously I didn't, at the time he left, I didn't defend him. I did feel like he'd been given so many opportunities at Williams. He had done so many things wrong that they had to take that points away from it. They had to take that drive, away from him. But on the flip side of that, he's got to be looking at this now and thinking, had I not shunted in Zandvoort, had I just kept it on the road, had I just waited a race or two, maybe I could have picked up points. And it's so hard to tell, because I think the thing with Franco Colapinto and the fact that now, we're talking about Williams having two competent drivers and capable of maximizing that Williams potential and getting the most points out of it possible, even though he's only been in there 2 races, maybe that comes from the positivity that he has brought, like, the energy, the enthusiasm, because Logan Sargent was very downbeat every weekend, and you can't blame him. He'd had a horrid time of it. But Franco Colapinto's come in, brought so much energy into that team, brought so much media attention, brought so much fun and anticipation. We were all like, oh, what's he going to be like? Is he going to be able to do this? What's Colapinto going to be able to achieve in the last 9 races? So much, hype around him coming in. I think maybe that also just then gives the whole team a boost. And Williams then believe in themselves a little bit. They believe in Colapinto, and that there's no pressure on Colapinto. There was so much pressure on Sargent, and therefore so much pressure on the team around Sargent to be able to hopefully deliver him points, because that was the thing, right? He needed to get some points at some point in the season. And Logan's mentality and the team's mentality around Logan's half of the garage must have just been in such a horrendous position that actually Colapinto coming in, fresh air, rookie coming in, no pressure whatsoever on him to deliver every single weekend, just allows them to be like, this is the spark that we need and something that we can then just build upon. And Alex Albon has kind of taken it with both hands. Obviously, Alex Albon's a stunning driver. We can talk about Alex Albon until the cows come home. But I just think the fact that Colapinto's come in there and done such a good job and brought that positivity back, I really, really love to see it. And obviously, then you're talking about Colapinto. He's not a Williams driver, right? He is the kind of test driver, maybe next season, something along those lines. Unless he can find himself a seat elsewhere. There's an RB seat available. There's a Stake Sauber seat available. Do you reckon it could Stake Sauber go for Colapinto? The problem is that they're also in talks with Bortoleto. And Bortoleto now took, obviously, the lead in the F2 championship after Hadjar has kind of fallen off a touch. We were talking about the probability or the problem that RB and Red Bull would have if Hadjar won Formula 2, because he wouldn't be able to go into it again. But that's kind of falling away a touch, isn't it? And now looks like Bortoleto is going to win it. Then McLaren want Bortoleto just kind of hanging around? Probably not. So maybe they're willing to give over to Stake Sauber. You got a feel for Teo Pourchaire and all of this. Still Teo Pourchaire not able to get a Formula 1 seat after being talked about a Formula 1 seat for so long, for so many years, and being at Sauber forever. Looks like a McLaren Junior might be the one to then go in and take that 2025 Stake Sauber seat. Or Colapinto. And that's the thing. Liam Lawson got himself into the mix by driving really well in 5 races. If Colapinto can have 9 races where he's really quick, or even if he has 8 races where he's really quick, and maybe he has one weekend where he messes up, I think that's absolutely fair enough. And I think he would start to be in the kind of talking position of wanting a Formula 1 seat and being like, I've proven myself. And maybe then Williams are under a little bit of pressure to find Colapinto a seat somewhere on the Formula 1 grid. I can't see it playing out fully. I don't think it's going to be the same pressure as like Liam Lawson has kind of put on RB, because Colapinto can still kind of drive in Formula 2 and maybe can go elsewhere and find various bits and pieces. But it's great to have Colapinto there, isn't it? Because it does mean if the Williams car isn't quite what we want it to be, or I want it to be in 2026, and we haven't got Albon and Sainz maybe like properly in the points mix a lot of the time, maybe that then, Carlos Sainz finds a way out, goes to a Mercedes, goes to an Aston Martin, something along those lines for 2027. Colapinto's there in the background and maybe gets a few more races here and there. Maybe they can strike a deal with someone else on the grid to get him some more experience elsewhere, and then Williams have a driver in Colapinto that they can bring back. And maybe replace Albon or replace Sainz. Like he's just looking like a superb, superb driver that Williams have got themselves in for. Fernando Alonso, talking of superb drivers, another masterclass from Fernando Alonso, wasn't it? Just absolutely, just nailed it. Just nailed the weekend, best of the rest, finished in 6th place. Feel like there's no more superlatives to talk about with Fernando Alonso. When he clicks with that car, he clicks with that car and puts in some stunning, stunning drives. And given how far like Aston Martin are adrift of the top 4 in the Constructors' Championship, you could argue that they kind of got nothing to fight for at this point, and they could just sort of take it easy. Fernando Alonso could get away with not really putting in the best performances. Like, if Fernando Alonso just sort of ended the season, he's still going to be 9th place in the Drivers' Championship. Aston Martin are still going to be 5th in the Constructors' Championship. He could easily kind of drift through the second half of this season and get away with it. Like, nobody would be like, oh, Fernando Alonso's completely fallen off. It would just be, oh, the Aston Martin car wasn't there, etc., etc. But he did enough and they finished where they should. So the fact that he is still pushing, the fact that he is still absolutely going for it and kept Alex Albon at bay at the end there as well, despite the Williams having the fresher tyres towards the end of the Grand Prix. Just, again, so fun to watch Fernando Alonso. And as much as I'm really excited to see all these rookies, like I'm just talking like Colapinto, the fact that he can't get a seat. Liam Lawson's not guaranteed to be on the grid next year. Piastri's been a breath of fresh air. Bearman was so fun, and we'll talk about him in a moment. There's so many really, so many Bortoletto coming in. There's so many talents, so many really exciting young drivers I'm ready to see. I do just like the fact that Fernando Alonso, in his 40s, is still one of the best drivers. He's still absolutely mustard, isn't he? And it's just like, if you said to somebody, okay, you've got to get rid of some drivers from the grid, like Fernando Alonso would probably be in there just because of the age that he is. But I feel like the fact that, you know, Kevin Magnussen might lose his seat, Daniel Ricciardo might lose his seat, Zhou Guanyu might lose his seat, Bottas might lose his seat. Those drivers are definitely ones I would get rid of voluntarily before I got rid of Fernando Alonso. Even though Fernando Alonso is so much older than the majority of them. He just does it so well. Lance Stroll was absolutely terrible. Do I need to say more than that? Qualified way behind Fernando Alonso. First lap, obviously after qualifying poorly. Oh, as a Sauber fan, I'd take Colapinto. Would you take Colapinto over Bortoletto, though? That's the thing. There's a little bit of talk of both. Liam Lawson is still there, by the way. Liam Lawson was kind of in the driving seat behind Carlos Sainz for that Stake Sauber position up until Binotto came in. Then Binotto kind of changed it around because it was Andreas Seidel who was in talks with Liam Lawson. Then Seidel kind of stepped back and therefore it kind of shifted in a different direction. But it'd be interesting to see how that Stake Sauber seat lines up next season. Nico Hulkenberg probably looking at the pace of the Haas and then the pace of the Stake Sauber car and thinking, what on earth I got myself in for? Please to God, Audi deliver something in 2026. And whether that will happen, I'm not so sure either. But yeah, who was I talking about? Lance Stroll. Miles away from Fernando Alonso in qualifying. And then on the first lap, did such a Lance Stroll-y thing. It kind of gave me flashbacks to obviously smashing into the side of Tsunoda on the first lap. Kind of gave me flashbacks to when he smashed into the back of the other RB of Daniel Ricciardo in China. And all of the repercussions of that. It wasn't quite as egregious a crash as the one that happened in China between him and Daniel Ricciardo, but I feel like the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll hitting into an RB and ruining all of their lives is now just becoming something that we see semi-regularly. And it's one of those things that Lance Stroll, I was really positive about Lance Stroll a couple of races ago, maybe, was it? Finished like 7th place fairly recently. Can't remember where it was exactly, but no, just not bothered by him in any way whatsoever this weekend and didn't see anything massively positive. Everything I've lived through, and Fernando was racing somewhere, mostly at F1. Exactly. He's an ever-present. And I think he deserves to be an ever-present. I think he deserves to stay there, to be honest with you. At Haas, Ollie Bearman, 2 races this season, 2-point scoring finishes. Kind of puts the discussion to an end, doesn't it, around him like not being good enough. I had a few people in my chat come in and say, like, well, he hasn't done anything in Formula 2. How come he's getting a Formula 1 seat over some of the other Formula 2 talents that are there? And I think the problem that Ollie Bearman had, or maybe something that kind of adjusted his mentality towards this season, is he knew he was going to get a Formula 1 seat very early on. I mean, Haas have been talking massively positively about Ollie Bearman since Mexico in 2023, where he came in, did that free practice 1 session, and Ayo Komatsu was massively praising of him then. The fact that Ayo Komatsu then becomes the team principal, the fact that they're still linked with Ferrari and they're still going to use Ferrari engines come 2026, like, it just felt like an obvious Ollie Bearman is going to go to Haas. Then he comes in for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, second Grand Prix of the season, puts in a stunning performance in a Ferrari car, and you're like, yeah, he's going to get signed to Haas at some point. And we were kind of waiting, weren't we? It was like, oh, okay, we know that Haas are probably going to get rid of Nico Hülkenberg. Nico Hülkenberg then left, and it was like, oh, okay, Ollie Bearman goes in to replace him. And then it was like, will they keep Kevin Magnussen? It wasn't who goes in alongside Kevin Magnussen, blah, blah, blah. It was, they'll have Ollie Bearman. Do they keep Kevin Magnussen? Which kind of points in the position where Ollie Bearman is ahead of Kevin Magnussen in the driver's standing still. I know he got 6 points in a Ferrari, and it's a lot easier to get points in a Ferrari than it is in a Haas. He still managed to get a point this weekend, still ahead of Kevin Magnussen in the standings. And I think Haas were, I feel like it's gone one of two ways, doesn't it? Like, you can talk massively positively. I think they were right to let Hülkenberg through in that kind of first stint. Although I heard that Ollie Bearman was actually overextending on his tyres and actually was holding onto his tyres a little bit too much. You know, a lot of the time we talk about drivers destroying their tyres and pushing them too hard. Apparently Ollie Bearman too soft on his tyres through that first stint and was underutilizing the rear end of that Haas car. And I think he was a little bit frustrated that he wasn't told that sooner. And Ayo Komatsu and the team kind of said afterwards, you know, that was a mistake on our part. Shouldn't be something that happens and something that we'll address. But they're still building that communication. It was Ollie Bearman's first race in a Haas, and he's been dropped in the middle of a season because Kevin Magnussen picked up a penalty and therefore was kicked out and dropped for a race. So the fact that Ollie Bearman had a little bit of a communication issue, the fact that he was 11th in qualifying, so close, actually would have got into Q3 and dropped Alex Albon out of the top 10 in Q3 had he not made a mistake right at the end of the second sector. So many positives about Ollie Bearman. And then obviously, ultimately gets the jump on Nico Hülkenberg, a really experienced Formula 1 veteran. If you look at the kind of number of races that each driver has had, Ollie Bearman 2, Nico Hülkenberg into the hundreds, and he gets the jump on him, and Bearman just kept it respectable, right? Just made sure he delivered every single lap, stabilized his position, made sure that he didn't lose out too much to Nico Hülkenberg, even when Hülkenberg was in front of him. And it felt like he kind of put all the pieces together and did really well. I think the only thing that falls away from that is he did drop behind Lewis Hamilton at the end. That's a Mercedes. And then he did get the jump on Nico Hülkenberg. And Nico Hülkenberg was properly like pickpocketed in the final or the penultimate lap. Basically, Lewis Hamilton and Ollie Bearman were kind of catching up to the back of Nico Hülkenberg. It was a proper little battle between those three. Again, kind of we were taken away from that battle because of the incident between Perez and Sainz. We don't know how that would have really played out. But I think, from what I gathered, Nico Hülkenberg, as soon as he went past the collision between Sainz and Perez, obviously it was double waved yellows. I think he already thought it was a safety car or a virtual safety car. Because he got to the end. He got to like turn 4, the left-hander at the end. He got to turn 3, the left-hander. And as he went round turn 3 and got in towards turn 4, it actually then went green flag again. I don't know why it wasn't a virtual safety car already at that point. It was green flagged. And I think he just didn't click that it was still a green flag at that point in the racing track. And literally just watched Hamilton and Bearman shoot past him. Because Hamilton and Bearman realized it was green flag. And the double waved yellows were only, past sort of turn 3 backwards. And they just jumped in front of him. it was like really odd to watch. And yeah, you'd think a driver with Nico Hülkenberg's experience just wouldn't be caught out by that kind of thing. But It's the penultimate lap of the race. You've done 50 laps around Baku, which is absolutely exhausting. And I think he's just caught out, just dropped his guard, and then dropped down to 11th. And he'll be so frustrated by that. Because as I said, 22 points in the Drivers' Championship. Just needs 1 point to escape Yuki Tsunoda. Just needs 2 points to catch up to Lance Stroll. He'll be so annoyed that he wasn't able to get it as they were going through and lost out on that point scoring place. Because he did lose 2 positions. That would have been a 9th place, would have been 2 points, would have been him equal with Lance Stroll. Again, would have been. Nico Hülkenberg. It's the first time I think I've been negative about Nico Hülkenberg all season. I think it's the first time Nico Hülkenberg's made a mistake that has been actually sort of problematic for the team all season. So he has been very, very good. Apart from when he broke both of the new front wings in Zandvoort, maybe. That was a bit of a head scratcher for the team. Let's round out with RB. I know that we haven't really touched upon Alpine or Sauber. I think Pierre Gasly was all right. I think Alpine were dreadful. The fact that they, again, had power unit problems where they're going through a protest to try and keep their power unit. Hilarious. But there it is. That is just Alpine, isn't it? Just really, really silly. Stake Sauber, I've kind of touched upon. I think the main thing about Stake Sauber is just who's going to go into that second seat. Can't see them getting points this season. Can't see them doing anything that's fun, to be honest with you. But RB, final team to touch upon. Really, really unlucky. I felt like this is one of Yuki Tsunoda's better tracks. He does generally get quite unlucky, though, in Baku. Was it a couple of seasons ago or maybe a season ago where he was doing really well, running in the points possibly, and then his DRS stayed open effectively. Like he couldn't close his DRS, and then he had to come into the pits and they had to gaffer tape his rear part of his rear wing down. It was something along those lines, wasn't it? It was can't remember if it was a year ago or 2 years ago, but yeah, Yuki Tsunoda's pretty quick here, but gets very unlucky, and I think it's just unfortunate. I'm going to use the word unfortunate that he goes into that turn 3, was it? Turn 4? No, turn 5. Turn 4, 5. Turns 5 or 6, can't remember right now, where then Lance Stroll just tries to jump up the inside of him, smashes into the side of Yuki Tsunoda's car. Didn't look like it was that bad a damage on Yuki Tsunoda's car initially, because obviously Lance Stroll came away with the puncture. That ruined Lance Stroll's race, and he was kind of done and dusted from that point forwards. But it felt like Yuki Tsunoda was kind of still in the mix and still battling with your Daniel Ricciardo's, your Hülkenbergs at that point in the Grand Prix, your Lando Norris's. He was there at the moment. But then once that kind of hole in the side pod really started to open up, you could just see how much drag that was causing him and how slow he was going on the straights. And when that back straight is so long in Baku, and he would have just been a sitting duck, it really was pointless to leave him out there and just burn through that power unit. Like, you might as well come back in, just take it as a loss and have it for another day. Like, it was one of those things, yeah, I really felt bad for Yuki Tsunoda in that. And obviously the first retiree of the race, Lance Stroll, then caught up to him and retired from the race later on anyway. Would Yuki Tsunoda have challenged for points? Maybe, maybe not. I feel like he would have been in that mix, right? He'd have been there with like Hamilton, Bearman versus Tsunoda for that 10th place finish. I think would have been quite close had he kind of been there for the whole Grand Prix. Difficult to say, though, because the pace of Daniel Ricciardo wasn't great over the course of the weekend. And when you look at like the RB compared to the Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso, the 2 Williamses, both of the Hasses, did feel like RB were kind of that next team along. Okay, Tsunoda and Ricciardo probably over the course of it were quicker than the Alpine. Although Gasly finished ahead of Ricciardo. I don't know. It was like they were quicker than Stake Sauber, but they were definitely slower than Williams, and they were definitely slower than Haas, and they were probably slower than the Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso. So whether Yuki would have got some points, it would have been right on the fringe of him being able to do so. But the fact that RB's advantage, obviously in the constructor standings, was cut pretty significantly by Williams, with Williams getting 10 points in that. The gap between them, 18 points rather than 28 points. Like another one of these weird races, and Williams jumping up again. Maybe that gets pretty exciting in the constructor standings. I do think they'll need another race where, like, well, 2 of the top drivers, 3 of the top drivers, really, because Hamilton wasn't there either. 3 of the top drivers miss out on finishing in the top 8. Like, they need that along the way. Did I talk about Williams? I did. You can go back, though. I talked about them just before Haas, and it was a full of praise for Williams. Don't you worry. I think Williams were stunning and have been stunning for a very, very long time now. But that just about rounds us up. We talked through everybody here in Baku. Oh, it was a long one, I feel. It was a long 1 hour and 30 minutes we've been going. Thank you guys so much if you did watch all the way through. Maybe dipped in and out. Wouldn't blame you for dipping in and out of this one, depending on who you're backing over the course of the Grand Prix weekend. But I've really enjoyed this one, actually. And if you would like to join me once again as we near 100,000 subscribers, I'm going to be live next weekend for the Singapore Grand Prix also, for qualifying, for the race. We're also live on the Friday beforehand for more of a fun stream where we just kind of chat anything that's happened over the Formula One week and just catch up with one another really on the Friday. And then back once again, post-race reactions. Remember, you can get your post-race reactions into the community tab, and that's what I base this video and these live streams off of. So if you want to get something in, if you want me to talk about something specific, make sure you get it on the community tab and then click that subscribe button. I've just subscribed. Thank you, Pascal. We are just going to round it up there. But yeah, we're getting towards 100,000 subscriber special. I feel like it's destined, right? I've got Singapore on the wall behind me. If we could hit 100,000 subscribers during my favorite Grand Prix, the Singapore Grand Prix weekend, that would be absolutely amazing. And then maybe, you know, between Singapore and Texas, we've got a little bit of a break. So maybe, just maybe 100,000 subscriber special in there as well. But thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff.